Hello everybody, my name is Craig Cobb and welcome to another episode of The Trader. Well, last week was certainly an interesting one, as they all seem to be at the moment, with a lot going on. Over in the US is where we're going to start. The US, of course, had the vice presidential election debate, which needs to be said, was a lot more civil than the first one, with the two big dogs hitting it out, as in Biden and Trump. Kamala Harris did talk well. So did Mike Pence. What was said? Not a great deal, but it was a lot less aggressive, I will say that. And how did it affect markets? Well, it didn't really affect markets in too much of a negative or positive way, to be fair. Of course, as we do get closer towards that November election deadline and the campaigns push on forward, things do get much more exciting and it becomes much more interesting as to what the market does as the polls swing. But of course, this is even more interesting this year because of obviously the last presidential election had Hillary Clinton absolutely blowing Donald Trump out of the water, but we know can get it wrong, and spectacularly so, as we saw when Donald Trump got elected. Now, when I say the polls, I don't mean the voters, I mean the polls that they put on the news. People of America spoke and they got Trump. What is going to be causing a lot more effect in our markets this week, and what did last week as well, is the man Donald Trump himself. You see, he came out with a tweet talking about no more stimulus. And my goodness me, it sent markets plummeting. It was a big move. It really dropped markets hard. That was at the beginning of the week. Later on in the week, I think someone actually told him, well, sir, you can't really say that because we kind of need it. Flip it comments, not so good about stimulus, because that is, ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, what is propping up the global financial markets at the moment. Of course, trillions of dollars going into the US dollar over the course of the year. Never have we seen so much stimulus, so much printing of currency in our time, and there's no doubt in my mind that in the future that is going to have to come back and, I suppose, knock on the door and rule the roost. You can't print that amount of money without weakening a currency, or you can't print that amount of money without weakening consensus towards that specific area where it's being printed. From my point of view, it's a really good advert for caution. In my view, when I look out there and I see pension funds, self-managed super funds, and just funds in general, they're all very heavily, well, not all, a lot of them are very heavily invested into equities. Now, where is the growth in equities coming from? It's coming from stimulus. And it's the trickle-down economics that's meant to work for the individual, but that means that a lot of the corporations have been for quite some time doing stock buybacks. It's a very interesting space right now, because now Donald Trump went from no more stimulus to, okay, conversations of stimulus are in fact rolling on. Now, it did affect the S&P 500. We did close up 3.8% last week, of course, with the open about to occur, well, in the next 12 to 18 hours. We will be interesting to see what comes out after a weekend away. The ASX also did quite well. It was up 5.5% this week, off the back of what? Off the back of the US. Look, at the end of the day, our COVID cases here in Australia are of concern. Victoria looks to be mentioning over the weekend are coming out of some of the more strict lockdowns and progressing their way back to a COVID norm. I know, we're sick of hearing it, right? The rest of the country seems to be faring quite well, with a couple of infections, new ones in New South Wales. I think Queensland's fairly straightforward and easy. And the only area was WA that managed to get away with just about everything in order, and they've got all the ore. So we've seen in the Australian market a bit of a positive week. It's not done much for quite a few weeks, to be fair. It's been relatively flat. What big things are going to come out this week that's going to affect our market? Well, it just depends on this presidential election. It really does come down to that. We had non-farm payrolls a couple of weeks back. What did that do? Very little. Very little indeed. In fact, as a matter of fact, it was worse than expected, but not a great deal actually occurred, because it just seems to be that major news announcements that were major news announcements are now kind of just caught up in the melee that is COVID and a presidential campaign. It has changed the space, it has changed the way markets are moving, and it is definitely a speculator's environment. That is, the traders out there like myself. With that volatility comes opportunity. We've seen some big moves outside of stocks lately as well. I spoke to you a little while back about MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy is a NASDAQ listed company in the US. They have now acquired $475 million worth of Bitcoin because they've given up hope on the USD. They think that their treasury management is much better held in Bitcoin, as there is a finite amount of Bitcoin and there is an infinite amount of US dollars. Now, they're not the only ones to do that. Another fund that is listed is called Grayscale. They own $4.8 billion worth of Bitcoin as well. And last week, we saw Square and Jack Dorsey come in and say that they had just acquired 1% of their wealth or their market cap by buying $50 million of Bitcoin. Of course, this saw Bitcoin drive up quite well and finish the week strongly. It does seem as though the tide has turned on this digital asset that many were calling a fraud only 3 years ago. The world is changing. COVID, the endless printing of money, so it seems, has certainly helped Bitcoin's cause, worthwhile having a look into. Of course, one thing we can't not talk about is the fact that Donald Trump has COVID. Okay, maybe he hasn't got COVID now, but he had COVID, and I don't know. Oh, it just, the narrative of 2012, it's got to be a movie, but it'll be one of those movies where you just go, this plot keeps jumping left and right. I can't keep up with this. It's absolutely insane what's going on out there. You know, it wasn't long until he was saying that he was fine, it's fine, everything's fine. And to be fair, this plays in very well to his chances of re-election, as in if he comes out and says, listen, if you get me back in, the business is open in the US, let's go get it. I think that's going to help his cause. It certainly is good for markets if we keep some form of consistency in what has been a very, very inconsistent year. At least having the same leader might give us some consistency in that market. But he seems to have come out of it. The debates are going ahead again this coming week, which is going to be very, very fascinating, as they always are. The main things to watch out for this week, I'm not so concerned about major news announcements as it stands. I'm more interested in just keeping the risk off. When I say risk off is when I trade the markets, I'm looking to risk up to about 1% per trade when I go out there and press the button. I'm minimizing that a little bit more at the moment, as we do see some very flippant moves going on out there. And if you want to learn how to manage your assets better, learn how to trade the markets, or learn how to read a chart, then you need to go across to tradercobb.com. That's where I live, that's what I do. Now, this has been another week of The Trader. I've got to say, there has been an awful lot going on that hasn't really come through as too positive or too negative. We seem to still be, it feels like 2020 is a duck, you know, calm on the surface and paddling like all buggery down below, trying to keep things together. We're not moving ahead at a great rate of knots, but we are moving ever so slightly. Any week, things can change significantly. We've got to keep an eye on what's going on, what's happening with COVID. We've got to keep an eye on this presidential election. We've got to be aware of certain events that are coming out, and we need to make sure that we call our friends and family and make sure they're okay during these very difficult times. Make sure you give them a call and check in. If you're not well, please call, reach out to a friend, or call Lifeline. Have a great week, ladies and gentlemen. This has been On The Trader. My name is Craig Cobb, and I'll speak to you again next week. Bye for now.